So speaking of patients, the FNIH has a commitment to patient centricity and community engagement in their strategic pillars, not only in their strategic pillars, but actually in the very first strategic pillar of what the foundation does. And so I'm very pleased now to welcome our president and CEO, Dr. Julie Gerberding, back to the stage, along with Tanya Kemphaus, who is our Director of Patient Engagement, to co-moderate a panel discussion of our FNIH patient ambassadors. And so these are lived experience or caregivers with lived experience in a number of the different AMP disease areas who are really very critical voices to the program and the work that it does. Thank you.
Well, good morning. What an exciting morning. I am really honored and thrilled to be part of this panel, and I wanted to give a little bit of a background on what's happening at FNIH in terms of the overall emphasis on patient engagement. For those of you who were here yesterday, you know that Francis and David both described one thing they would do differently, which would have been to have more concentrated effort on patient inclusion, patient engagement from the very beginning of the AMPs. But that situation was remedied over time, and increasingly there has been significant patient participation. You've been hearing about some of it. But in the last several months, as an organization and looking around and appreciating how important true, meaningful patient engagement is across all of our work, we have made a leadership commitment at FNIH to really take this up a few notches. And by that I mean really in part of our strategic planning in terms of our key results and our objectives year to year, in terms of the people we're hiring and how we are prosecuting our portfolio. We really have an intent, and I think have made a lot of progress in being much more inclusive of the patient's perspectives, from the idea that emerges to start a new project all the way through the communication of the end state. I was fortunate at Merck to serve as the Chief Patient Officer, among a few other titles that I had there, and in that role, I came across a really remarkable woman who came into my team to lead our patient engagement efforts. She's not here today. Her name is Jan Nissen, but she's been an well, she is here today. Jan, hooray. I didn't know you were going to be with us. She has just been a remarkable inspiration to all of us at FNIH as a part-time consultant, and has really helped us translate some of the best practices in other parts of the life science ecosystem into the work we're doing at FNIH. And then I have a wonderful in-house colleague, Tanya, who many of you know from her other work in project areas. But Tanya has taken on an additional responsibility as our Director of Patient Engagement. And the wonderful people sitting on this panel are here in part because of her efforts to identify people who are really willing to serve as patient ambassadors. Not just tell the story of FNIH, but tell the story of the importance of clinical research, of team science, and the value that that can bring to patients and their families as we go forward. The other amazing thing that Tanya has initiated at FNIH is the Patient Advisory Council, where we have members of the patient community who give us expert advice about our protocols and our clinical program development. So we're still learning. We have a long ways to go, but it's thrilling to have these wonderful contributors to our effort around this panel discussion today. And so you'll get to hear a little bit about their views on what we're doing well and what we should be doing better. And of course, at the end of the table, Joni, we want to make sure you're not regarded as a patient advocate, but as the head of ANCATS, and your incredible wisdom and support for all of this work is critical. So I'm going to turn it over to Tanya to kick us off with a little exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I'm Tanya Kemphaus, and many of you know me. I've been involved in 3 separate AMP programs, the original AMP type 2 diabetes, AMP in common metabolic diseases, and the new kid on the block, AMP in heart failure. And really delighted today to introduce this wonderful panel. But before we do that, this is the hour before lunch, and we thought it'll be really good to have an interactive exercise. So if my colleagues will pull up a QR code for us, we want you to, yep, that should be fine. You know, in one word, how would you define patient engagement? And I think if we could, once the QR code goes in, I think we should probably switch back to the panel so we can get the introduction started. Let's see if we can pull up the QR code again. Sorry, we were trying to figure out how to do this last night. It's a little challenging. We got it. Okay. No. I'll give everybody a minute. This is an interactive exercise, and you know, it's always a good day when it starts with Cynthia telling us her story. I always enjoy that, and you know, one of my favorite quotes is, "It's arguably more important to get to know the patient who has a disease than get to know the diseases in a patient." And all AMPs, all 10 of them, are focused on the disease that impacts patients. And all through yesterday and today, we've heard so much about how these patients have been involved in the AMP programs. But with this session, we'll just switch the lens and talk about AMP in a patient-centric manner. So if you go to the next slide, I'll get us introduced to this wonderful panel. So maybe we'll just go in this direction. And Carlos, you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning. My name is Carlos. I am the representative for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the largest grassroots advocacy organization for the AMP schizophrenia effort, and serve as co-chair of the steering committee.
Hi, I'm Janet Church. I'm the CEO and president of the Sjogren's Foundation, and I'm a Sjogren's patient.
My name is Terry Provolakis. I'm the founder and CEO of Alpida Therapeutics, as well as a foundation called Cure SPG50. I was thrown into this world after my son was diagnosed with a rare disease called spastic paraplegia type 50, and now trying to treat many other children with different diseases.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sharon King. I am a rare mom. I had a daughter with CLN1 Batten disease. And I've spent years as a patient advocate. Before that, I was a piano teacher. Today, I serve in a professional advocacy role at Aldevron, a CDMO, and I am in a unique role, a zebra, you might say, as I bring patient stories and share stories of impact with the associates with whom I work.
And hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Edelmeyer. I am one of the scientists at the Alzheimer's Association that really is responsible for scientific engagement activities for our organization. And I also sit on the steering committee as part of the AMP-AD program, and the association and the NIA are highly engaged with each other as partners on a variety of activities.
Hi, I'm Maggie Kuhl. I lead patient engagement at the Michael J. Fox Foundation and in study engagement of participants in our Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative study. MJFF is a founding member of AMP-PD, and PPMI is a major contributor to the program.
Hello, I'm Will Chutko. I'm from Novartis, where I direct heart failure drug development for the company, and I'm also a cardiologist and have the privilege of still seeing patients at the VA Healthcare Center in Boston.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joni Rutter. I'm the director of the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, also part of the AMP-BGTC, and I am an aspiring patient advocate because my mother had a rare disease called myelofibromatosis, and I'm excited to be here to be a part of this panel to reflect all of those views.
Thank you, and just for a little orientation, we have 4 patient ambassadors here. And then we have Rebecca and Maggie represent advocacy groups, and we have Will to give a little bit of the industry perspective. And all the AMP programs, we different stakeholders are working together to ensure that patient voices are heard and effectively engaged. And we have Joni from FNIH. So that's a little bit of the orientation of our panel today. So I'm going to hand it over to Julie for the first question.
Well, thank you, and I'll just jump right in, Carlos, because you and I have talked a few times. Carlos has just been so involved in helping us plot this journey and move it forward. So, I'm going to ask you a big picture question, Carlos. What do you think is the most valuable dimension of having this patient public-private partnership, the 4 Ps, as part of the AMP program, and where do you see the biggest value?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Well, just to take a step back, the big picture, we have this huge unmet need on one hand, right, with schizophrenia. And on the other hand, we have this industry capacity and investment, and they're not aligned. So, we know, schizophrenia has this enormous direct cost to families and indirect cost to society with incarceration and homelessness and things like that. But what was happening in this space was that people were kind of pulling out because they felt it was too risky a proposition to invest in psychiatric drug development. So this public-private partnership, at the heart of what it does is, and you're all aware of this by now, is it really de-risks the investment for industry by pooling together expertise and resources to find the scientific tools that will facilitate drug development. And I can't overstate the importance of the role of government here in investing in this innovation. And schizophrenia in particular, the hope is that biomarkers can ultimately lead to early intervention and better treatments, which is a stark contrast to the status quo where people often get care during or after a crisis, when in many cases it's much too late. Even for me, it took years of finding the right treatment through a process of trial and error, and my diagnosis was delayed by months given the inherent subjectivity in getting a psychiatric diagnosis. So as it is, we are effectively waiting for people in stage 4 to get the care they need, which is unacceptable. So I think the public-private partnership is a huge step in the right direction.
And I was going to follow up with Janet. Janet, so you are a Sjogren's patient and it's an old-time amper, shall we say. You've been with 2 amps now. It's such a heterogeneous disease, and it takes a while to diagnose, and it affects so many people. I'm now just broadening it to all immune and autoimmune diseases. How do we effectively integrate voices of so many different perspectives and patients as part of the AMP program, and how is AMP AIM doing it?
Oh, well, that's a great question. So first of all, you're correct. Sjogren's is underdiagnosed, and even those that do have a diagnosis, about 2 million of us in America are diagnosed, and we estimate about 2 million more are undiagnosed. But the 2 million Americans that do have a diagnosis are greatly misunderstood by their healthcare providers. The majority of healthcare providers consider Sjogren's a nuisance disease, if the healthcare provider has heard of the disease and knows to take a look at it with the patient's symptoms. So this really is dismissive of the patient. So this nuisance presentation really doesn't allow the patient to be treated well and to seek all the treatment they need. And in fact, a Sjogren's patient requires 5 to 8 specialists to care for them. The disease is not just a dry eye, dry mouth disease. It impacts the entire body. I myself have 8 specialists, which is annoying. I don't even bother with the primary care. I don't have time for that. But this is a very common story. And the biggest thing I want to say about our involvement with AMP-AIM, and this is really our AIM is really our first AMP. So we are just getting started. The STAMP team that presented yesterday, we are just getting started, and we are so excited. But I really want to highlight what happened at the beginning of our relationship that really speaks to what you're committing to. So when we were asked to join the AMP-AIM program, we were super excited because, of course, when patients feel neglected and their disease isn't represented fairly, having something put forward like Sjogren's into a serious AMP project really demonstrates to the country that, yes, Sjogren's is a serious and systemic disease. So that first statement of invitation showed us validation. So our community felt greatly validated, finally. And this is really critical. The second thing that was my experience with actually Steve Hoffman, when we were talking about what our requirements were to come in as a steering committee member, is that I strongly requested, maybe required, Steve might remember it differently, that the disease not be called Sjogren's syndrome. The disease is Sjogren's disease. Now, officially, the name still internationally is Sjogren's syndrome, but we are in a nomenclature initiative internationally, and we are in process of changing the name of the disease. And the Sjogren's Foundation, many years ago, about 4 years ago, we dropped syndrome. We're just the Sjogren's Foundation. Fortunately, one of our great research entities also on the STAMP team, OMRF, also uses Sjogren's disease, which we are grateful for. But FNIH stepped up and said, yes, we will only use Sjogren's disease. That was a big deal. So we went from feeling validated to being respected, because syndrome made us feel dismissed. It's a smaller complication that we have playing into that nuisance story. So it really has been an incredible opportunity to work with the FNIH and not only be told that you want to do patient engagement well, but to be truly listened to and to have what we want as a community be adopted. And that was before we got started on research, and we are so excited to see what's going to come next.
Thank you. Sharon, I hope everyone here has had a chance to go on the FNIH website and see the wonderful video that Sharon created for us to really tell the story of the importance of the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium. It's truly a beautiful and very moving video, and if you weren't excited about gene therapy before you saw it, you would certainly be excited about it after you've seen it. So Sharon, thank you again for that amazing and heartfelt contribution. You've really, in a sense, been on a quest, particularly a quest to tell the story of your daughter, but also to help people understand the hope that exists for rare diseases and why our work is so important. I'm sure you would have a lot of really good things to say about patient engagement, FNIH, and all of these partnerships, but I don't want people to think that we're in la-la land here. It's hard, and maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the challenges of getting that point of view heard and understood.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Oh, thank you. I'm not a scientist. I started my career as a musician, teaching children and adults piano and hoping to create a love of music in them, to share that, sharing that love with me. But then July 24th, 2006 happened. And that's the day that changed my life, changed the life of my family, and it absolutely changed the life of my youngest child, Taylor. She was diagnosed with CLN1 Batten disease. Batten disease is a devastating neurological illness. It steals everything it can from a child, from their vision, ability to walk, talk, swallow. They have seizures, cognitive loss. And when the disease steals everything it can, it takes their life too. Science, I didn't have much science in my background as a musician, but science became very important to me on July 24th, 2006. And it's the day that my family realized that we had to take on a new role as patient advocates. And it would be essential if we were going to go after that hope that we thought our child needed. We heard no treatment, no cure. That means for us, no hope. So we went after it for Taylor. We raised awareness, we raised funding, lots of funding, and we supported multiple studies. 6 years in, we went all in for AAV gene therapy. And looking back, the science almost feels as if it was the easy part. And I say that with a smile because if some of the people who worked in the lab developing this potential treatment for CLN1 disease are in this room, they're probably thinking, you weren't in the lab with us. But that almost felt like the easy part. It was what came after that began to feel not just like a hurdle, but like a wall, lots of walls. 3 years after we shared our first support, we shared to the world that we were going to support this project. Rare Disease Day 2013, about 3 years later, the project was licensed to industry. We were overjoyed. And then the project fairly quickly received the IND allowance in May of 2019. We were even more joy-filled. That was just months after Taylor passed away. We always knew, we never kidded ourselves that this was specifically for Taylor. We had hope, but we had a dream that children and families like our own would have the opportunity for a better outcome than Taylor was given. Still, we advocated for this project. We felt about this project as if it was our child that we had sent to college to learn and to do good in the world. So we stayed behind it. We tried to support our industry sponsor. We funded and organized the development of the clinical consensus best management study to support the clinical development for the trial. We stayed with this project and we loved it like one of our children. But after the IND radio silence, the only thing you heard was a clock ticking. There was not much else. Time, effort, cost, we were told, was the reason it just had to stay quiet for a while. That wasn't good enough for us, and it certainly wasn't good enough for the CLN1 community. So we went on out to battle to find someone else who would take interest in this project and help move it forward. And we found that that industry sponsor appeared. And again, we lost time because we had to start, there was a new start, you might say, but we were in progress, things were moving. And then in February of 2022, when I felt quite certain that we were moving very close to clinic, I heard that the program was paused. For families who were waiting with this sense of urgency, the clock is ticking deafeningly in their heads. They were devastated. The program is still paused. And we know, this restart, again, what stopped this was, issues around funding, small population, pathway, the regulatory pathways that could get to trial and could actually get to an approved therapy, but always funding small population. The CLN1 disease experience is not unique. We need science, operational, and regulatory pathways that are consistent and relevant for very small populations like CLN1 disease. If we can develop this process, and I believe we can, I believe it'll also stimulate investment in conditions that are ultra rare. If we fail, we are leaving a huge population of children, families, and adults without hope and without an option. And I know we can do better, and that's why I'm so thrilled to have this connection to the FNIH and the BGTC.
Thank you, Sharon. Terry, you are in a similar fight in and you've been a tireless advocate as well. Just talk to us a little bit about how AMP BGTC has helped, and maybe what we could do to move things faster, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so, before my son was diagnosed, the last 20 years of that, before that 20 years, I was an IT director building large infrastructure for banks across Canada. And when Michael was diagnosed on April 2nd, 2019, my life changed forever. And I knew that I had to try to save my little boy and the children that were affected. And I'll never forget, I went to the CEO of the hospital the second day after Michael was diagnosed, and I said, I will raise whatever you need me to do to save him. And, sorry. Just a second. And he goes, we're not equipped to save him. There's nothing we can do to help him. And, sorry, I apologize. Sorry. And, after that, I started reading up online and reading up on what needed to be done, and we found within a month of time that we needed to do gene therapy, and that was the only way to get Michael's treatment. And we were fortunate enough to realize that there was amazing people in this world that were working on the gene therapy. And as you see in my picture, one of those teams was actually at the NIH over 20 years discovering the disease and understanding it. And the other person was Dr. Stephen Gray and his team that's in the room today that helped us make the gene therapy. And as we went through this journey, after we raised $4.5 million, went through toxicology, manufacturing, and all the things we had to do, and we dosed my son on March 24th of 2022, we realized we had to get it to all the children, not just Michael, not just 1 or 2 children, but all the children deserve to be treated. And what happened after that was that, the day after Michael was treated, we had a meeting, if you can believe it, the day after, and the team was like, well, what do you plan to do? And I said, I plan to dose every single child and eradicate this disease forever. And what happened was we were fortunate enough to be led into the BGTC program that inspired me to continue on. And 90 days after Michael was treated, we came out with our first IND to a phase 1/2 trial to treat 2 more children, which we treated at UTSW last year. And we actually treated a 5-month-old in December of last year as well. And what the BGTC really allowed me to do was just to fully commit to doing what we needed to do. I quit my job, I started a company, we hired 4 individuals, we took on 2 programs from the BGTC in support, CMT4J, SPG50, in order for us to see those programs through. And it really committed me to getting this further along and seeing the end of these 2 diseases. I think what we could do better is we can get out of our own way. When I was in IT and I was building these very complex infrastructures, my boss said we need to figure out a way to get out of our own way. And I think what happens is when we're talking about a very large institution like the NIH, I think we need to figure out a way to move things quickly because every day matters to these children. And if we can do that, I think we can get to these treatments extremely quickly. So, thank you.
Thank you. That's a very heartfelt story. Thank you for sharing it. Rebecca, first of all, Alzheimer's Association is such a fantastic partner and one of our visionary sponsors of the meeting. So thank you for your ongoing support and your energy and your amazing leadership. One of the things, of many things that Alzheimer's Association is particularly focused on is inclusion and making sure that the work you do is embracing of the whole population of people who are experiencing the challenges of Alzheimer's disease. So can you talk a little bit about that sort of inclusion mandate, but also how you see the AMPs being able to do more in that space?
Absolutely, and thank you, Julie, for the opportunity to be able to talk with you all today. So, sitting here with my patient advocacy hat on, I do want to share the association is serving more than 6 million Americans today that are living with Alzheimer's disease and more than 11 million unpaid caregivers and care partners that are really looking for the ability to have improved early detection and diagnosis with new biomarkers that are developed, new treatments that are developed, and making sure that we're really improving that overall care journey for individuals. And the association has absolutely valued working with the FNIH and AMP-AD because it fills a very particular need to continue to develop a pipeline of new science that's going to feed into the evidence that actually drives early detection, diagnosis, risk reduction, prevention, and new treatments. And for us, it is important that all of the data that we are collecting as part of this particular program that feeds that pipeline is inclusive of every single family and every single patient that is living with Alzheimer's or another dementia today. And so we've worked very, very intentionally with the NIA and the AMP-AD team to make sure that the projects that are funded through this consortium are very thoughtful in that approach in terms of how they're encouraging and sort of seeding and scaling inclusive recruitment of individuals that are participating, particularly in some of the AMP-AD 1.0 projects, when we talk about some of the biomarkers in clinical trials, like the A4 study, the Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer's Network, and Dominantly Inherited Trials Unit projects. The association partners with AMP-AD for some of those projects, but we also partner externally from AMP-AD on many of those projects in a lot of ways where we're bringing in the participant voice, the caregiver voice, and we're making sure that that is also included in the conversation for those projects. We help to sponsor the Diane family meeting every year at our Alzheimer's International Conference. We help to also facilitate, we just hosted another meeting for individuals with early onset Alzheimer's disease, their families, to learn about the science so that they are part of that process. And we've seen outside of even of the AMP-AD projects where we work very, very closely and intentionally with NIA to make sure that that patient voice is included and that we have a number of individuals that are part of our early stage advisory group that are incredible advocates for the science, but also advocates for increased federal funding. And that's critical too, because projects like AMP-AD, these sometimes risky but high reward types of work can be done through increased funding that comes in through the federal government and that is appropriated every year. So there's a variety of ways that I think our patients, our families are involved in the work that is feeding into the projects of AMP-AD, and as well as I'm sure through many of your consortia as well. I would just really continue to encourage you to include their voice intentionally, proactively, create that trustworthiness in the projects that you are doing, because I think it will return in dividends for you as you realize that your science will be even more inclusive in its returns and benefits for the patients and families.
So, oh yes, Maggie. Hi, Maggie. You know, one of the things that AMPs typically do they're all big data project, as we've all seen a ton of data slides yesterday and today can attest to how much richness of data exists. And one of the questions that keeps getting asked, in a very reasonable question, is how do we engage a patient voice in a project that's around big data. So Maggie and I were talking, and one of the things we discussed was the importance of return of results. And I know that the Michael J. Fox Foundation has been very intentional in how patients are being consented for the data that's shared with AMP-AD, and how you're thinking about maybe engaging with the project and sharing the results of it to the community.
Sure, thank you. First, I want to thank my fellow panelists for sharing your personal stories. I'm honored to represent the Parkinson's community here, and as I said, to be a longtime partner in AMP-AD. For a heterogeneous disease like Parkinson's, the big data approach, the many hands on deck is really critical. So again, just thanks for the opportunity and the partnership. So speaking of partnership, if I had answered that QR code question before, I think my definition of patient engagement is partnership. Clinical research participants are true partners in studies, and to me that includes an exchange of information, a two-way street, if you will. So I think of return of results in really three planes. One is return for the individual, one is return on the science, and one is return results for the research process. And I think that AMP really hits all of those. So for the individual, as I said, I lead in study engagement for our large PPMI study, and we're lucky enough in Parkinson's to have some biomarkers that we can be reporting back to individuals on their individual research information and their biomarker results. And so we are wading into that. There's a lot of implications, especially in risk populations, things like long-term care insurance implications, care decisions, et cetera. So we're really working with our participant partners to think about how and when and in what manner we're rolling out individual results. But on top of that, I think yesterday in the conversation there was a result around a new genetic variant in African and admixed populations out of the GP2 program that's part of AMP. And that breakthrough in the science, though we're not yet able to deliver someone's individual result, is something that we can be returning this value, that your contribution of those data and samples have led to this breakthrough that hopefully will translate into that first plane where we are able to give you your individual genetic variation. And one day there will be a specific therapy for that, that genetic change. But the third thing too, I think with AMP is just returning to participants the impact on research, things like building a knowledge portal. There's 1,000 researchers using this data. Participants want to know that they're having an impact and that their contributions are having this ripple effect and driving momentum. They hear the clock ticking, and so they want to know that things are moving forward. And so sharing that back with participants, more of the programmatic updates, I think is often overlooked, but we've found is really impactful and well received from our participants. So for the AMP program, through your advocacy partners, through the studies that you're collaborating with, continuing to go back to those individual contributors, especially with something like big data or omics where it feels very arm's length, but remembering that a person gave you those data and those samples, and bringing them along on that journey as a true partner is something that we've been doing in partnership with AMP, I think have been pretty successful.
Thank you. So, Will, we heard a lot about heart failure this morning, and we heard a lot about the importance of endomyocardial biopsies for getting the tissues that we need to be able to do the deep analysis that this disease calls for. But convincing patients that that's really an important contribution that they can make to have their heart biopsied brings some pretty important challenges. So could you talk a little bit about how that conversation proceeds and how patients helped you develop the right approach and the kind of transparent conversation that I know has been going on with those patients?
Absolutely. And first of all, I also want to thank the participants here, and these are very powerful stories. So the first question, I think, came down to convincing ourselves that this was the right thing that we needed to do. And there was a bit, this is obviously investigator kind of focused questioning. Is this the right thing to do to collect endomyocardial tissue, which is a very risky thing to do, and this is the right path forward. So we did spend time educating ourselves and trying to understand, and this is also based on experience from partners that we've had that have, I think, Ken Margulies, who is here in the audience, who spent decades building repositories of donated hearts and explanted end-stage hearts, to know that we needed to do something further, and it's easy to say this, braver, which is to ask something of great risk to patients to take tissue from a living person. Once we had actually realized that, I think the conversation became not how to do this, if to do this, but how to do this. And so we have two competing interests here, two competing imperatives. One is this large concept that we need to change the landscape, as we've described in our AMP this morning, through molecular terms, and that this is the path forward. And to take tissue from a person, to get that type of information, to hopefully re-change the landscape and the taxonomy of heart failure, we're looking at some of the frailest patients. We heard the beautiful testimony from Cynthia earlier today. I think you could also see both in her words and her physicalness that she's a frail woman. So to do something that's risky and in a frail person is a real challenge. And so the countervailing is then that practitioner that needs to actually have that patient in front of them and know the imperative that with the person in front of you, all of these grandiose ideas around us, protect this person, do no harm to this person. And if you're asking risk, at least you're giving benefit. And we can make no mistake, there is no benefit to any patient to take an endomyocardial biopsy. I think it was communicated earlier that in this day and age, we now have non-invasive tools for which this population obviates the need to do a biopsy. So now we're looking at a scenario where we're only asking risk, and before we get to the patient, we have an interventionalist who does not want to do harm to that person. So there's the conflict. And so where did we tip? And I think it's in the patient voice that really changes the equation. And we've learned this. We've learned this from our colleagues at Johns Hopkins who have pioneered this type of an approach in this patient population, that there are people that with disease that want to contribute, that want to be partners, as you've described, in this process of trying to understand the disease from a deep sense of altruism, that they want to not help themselves, but to help others so that they won't suffer the disease that they're afflicted with. So no benefit in their lifetime. And I think in many, it's a sense of knowing that their suffering can have purpose, that it's not just suffering for suffering, but that somebody will benefit. And that's a deep and a gratifying sense of altruism. And so with those voices that we heard, I think that galvanized us to then ask the question, if it's not us, then who's going to do this? And frankly, if not now, then when? That we've made that step forward. And as we go forward, of course, hearing from the patient as we go through the process, it'll be an important part of the journey as we embark on this.
And Joni, you should just bring us home with all the wonderful things that NCATS has been doing. NCATS is involved in the Patient Advisory Council that Julie mentioned. You're deeply involved with MPGTC, but I know there is just so much that the Institute does for engaging not just patients, but communities in both getting ideas for new research and sharing findings. So could you give us a little bit of that?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the opportunity to share this this session with this group of folks, to tell the story about what it means to be a part of a community working on rare diseases and trying to study them. I think I'd like to maybe rename this session on, maybe let's call it Amped Up, because in a way, we're hearing a sense of urgency, and we need to be amped up to really start to address that together as a larger community. So I'm renaming it. I'm taking the liberty. But I want to start off by also just recognizing the very first session that we held in this event that FNIH is sponsoring. And when David Wholey said that it's about getting patients and communities involved from the outset, have those patients and communities involved in the design of the programs and involved in the outset, that's so important. This is so critical to our success, because ideas that are inclusive are ideas that embrace and reflect the diverse experiences of all who are involved. And I think there's nothing more important than having really this disruptive technology as the patients, as our partners in the journey that we go forward in. And so at NCATS in particular, we're one of the few NIH ICs that doesn't work on a particular organ system or system at all. And we work on really over all 10,000 diseases. And as you know, most of those are rare. So we do this by studying what's common across diseases and using platform-based approaches to tackle the scientific challenges as well as the operational challenges, a lot of which you've already heard about through the different panels today and yesterday. And so our three main goals are to bring more treatments for all people more quickly. And without having people at the center of that, we're not going to get this accomplished to the extent that we would really like to see. So the way that we bring patients into our work, we do this a few ways. Number one, we use convenings to do reach out and engagement with different patients and community advocacy groups, much like we're doing here today. Number 2, we develop resources with and for patients. Number 3, we include our patients and patient advocates in our council discussions, as well as our funded research. And I want to give you some examples of some of those activities that we do. The first of all is the convenings that we hold, and I want to sort of do a public service announcement because it is February, it's Rare Disease Month, and at the end of this month we have the rarest of all days, Rare Disease Day, on February 29th, where we will have the Rare Disease Day at NIH. And this is an annual symposium that we hold each year, and no matter your background or what sector you represent, if you think about rare diseases in your work at all, this is a can't-miss event. It brings clinicians, researchers, patients, patient advocacy groups, all of the NIH leaders and congressional leaders that are compelled to be supportive of research on rare diseases, and it really shines a spotlight on stories told by patients who are living with rare diseases and sharing their experience as well, many of which you've heard today too. And so that is one of those areas where we hold these convenings to bring the patient voice into the conversation. And then I also want to highlight a few NCATS resources that are designed for and by patients as well. One is called GARD, the Genetics and Rare Disease Database, and this is an example of sort of identifying the many different rare diseases that are out there and linking to different patient organizations as well that help support the data that go into the GARD database, like from the National Organization of Rare Diseases, or NORD, Orphanet, and even Genetic Alliance, to list just a few of those different groups that work to provide some of the data and resources for GARD. And it's a collection of natural history studies that are conducted in the rare diseases that are there, registries, clinical trials, et cetera. So it's really a great resource for a variety of rare diseases out there in case you have patient or patient organizations that need that. Another resource is we have a toolkit for patient-focused therapy development, and this is a toolkit essentially to help patients navigate the research space, help them find researchers out there who might be doing research on a variety of projects that would relate to a rare disease that someone may be interested in. And so this is a way we can help define a roadmap for them to help identify that research. And then the last resource I wanted to mention in this area of these resources that we provide is an area that we teamed up with the FDA. And this is a project where we called Cure ID, and it's basically an app that we have developed with FDA. It's a crowdsourced kind of an approach where we have developed this platform where you can identify physicians who have provided treatments to people with rare diseases or other kinds of infectious diseases, for example, those therapies may not be indicated for those treatments or for those diseases. But because of what we know about pharmacology and what those physicians might think about that particular disease, they may try this particular therapy for that patient. And Cure ID is able to identify that and crowdsource that information to make it available for others. And we have now enabled not just healthcare providers to put data into Cure ID, but also patients as well. They can input that information themselves. So this is sort of another way where we can identify ways to treat diseases and in a way using older drugs or repurposed kinds of drugs. And then the last area I wanted to comment on is how we're bringing patients and patient advocates into the funding space that we have at the NIH. And we've held challenges to help raise awareness about rare diseases, such as the Rare Diseases Are Not Rare challenge. And this is a way to amplify patient voices in a dialogue about raising awareness around rare diseases. And these are voices that may not get heard otherwise. So this engagement also in a way democratizes the way that we're able to have the discourse around rare diseases and have that discussion a little bit more broadly within the rare disease community. Another example is that NCAT spearheads the flagship Rare Disease Clinical Research Network. And this is a collaboration across a variety of different institutes across the NIH. And within this particular program, through the award process, through the application process, there is a requirement for patient advocacy groups to be involved. And originally, the patient advocacy groups were very much tied to the particular studies that were being identified through the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network, but now they have expanded. There are hundreds of patient advocacy groups involved now today. And I think that is the secret sauce as to why there is now, I believe it's 10 different FDA-approved therapies for, 9 different FDA-approved therapies for 10 different rare diseases. So this has been extraordinarily important for the work that has been done in the rare disease space as well. And it allows the patients and the patient advocacy groups to be really a part of shaping, identifying who patients might, other patients that might be involved in clinical trials or the studies that are being done, the natural history studies, providing awareness to different communities as well. So they really provide this trusted resource for a variety of rare disease groups that are involved in the RDCRN. And then I just want to close by giving a shout out to the FNIH. You've already commented on this, but the Patient Engagement Council is really important, I think, to the AMP programs and how we think about bringing in the patient voices. And the AMP BGTC is really no different to that. I think it exemplifies how public-private partnerships create this sort of pivotal platform of integrating diverse perspectives, particularly those from patients from marginalized communities, different backgrounds, and it brings them directly into the research process. And since BGTC is really closer to that clinical implementation, the work with the patient community just makes it all that much more imperative. So I want to thank FNIH for helping to lead the way in this front.
Thank you, Joni. Now, Tanya's going to have a big reveal.
It's time for big reveal. All right, who said essential? I'm going to give Julie the CEO privilege of picking a word.
Thank you. Well, as much as I agree with the word essential, and it was my word, and I don't think they knew that, so there's no bias in the presentation here. But I'm actually going to pick a different word because I think it's really something that affects everyone in this room, and that's trust. It's no secret that we're dealing in an environment where trust is kind of at an all-time low. People's ability to have confidence in the reliability of the medical information that they're receiving or the advice that they get, but also their trust in organizations that traditionally have been resources for high trust. So I'd love to just have kind of a lightning round here and go down the road, maybe starting with Joni, short answers, but just if you have any advice on what we as FNIH or we as an ecosystem might be able to do to increase trust among our patient communities, we'd love to get your advice.
Wonderful. Trust is so important, and I would just add too that as the research community, engaging the patients in the process not only engenders trust, but it also brings a trustworthiness to the work that we're doing as the scientific community. And so that trust and trustworthiness counterbalancing that whole idea, I think, is really important.
Thank you.
And these are all terrific. Trust is, I think, the most important, and I think transparency is critical for trust. I think that there's a call to give back what we've been learning, but I think that's clear. We need to communicate better what it is that we're doing, what we're trying to achieve, and as we do so, to communicate back and to maintain that partnership.
Thank you.
Stole my answer, but I guess I already talked about that a little bit. I'll choose another word, listening. I think the positioning of the patient community as the partner requires us to be quiet and to open our ears and to learn what's important to them. So that's how we build trust.
Yeah, and I think becoming trustworthy is very, it needs to be intentional. I think that there's almost a science of inclusion that needs to be introduced into how we do our work. That means doing community participatory-based research, creating community advisory boards, patient or caregiver advisory boards. That's critical, I think, in our work, and it can't be an afterthought. It has to be at the start, and I think that was brought up, I think, on the first day, even on the first panel, of one thing that we would do from the beginning. We all need to be thinking that way for every single project that we're planning moving forward.
Thank you. Sharon.
I'm going to repeat Maggie's. I do think it's all about listening. I also think that trust is a lot about transparency, so I'm going to also agree with Will here. Being willing from both sides to share honesty, to tell those stories and to share information, no holds barred, because truly we're all in this together. Patients absolutely are essential. So that word, I would go with that word too. That voice is so essential.
Thank you.
I think in the rare disease community, trust has always been at the NIH. I don't think it ever left. I think it's always been there. I did what my children would do last night. I went to ChatGPT and I typed in what would, the exact sentence we looked on here, and it came up with collaborative. And I think that's a perfect word as well, because I think without collaboration, we will never get to where we need to go. You cannot do it individually. It's a collaborative effort. So I don't think trust ever left, to be honest with you, from the rare disease community anyways.
It's really nice to hear. Thank you.
And I think really listening to the patient's whole lived experience with the disease and considering the range of symptoms that impacts them most. And of course, I speak predominantly about Sjogren's, so we've been so focused on ocular and oral research, and really we're learning so much more about the peripheral nervous system impact, ILD impact, kidney impact, heart. So it is important to look at the person totally and then ask the complete story of their disease experience.
Thank you.
I think to facilitate trust, we need to be intentional about how we reach hard-to-reach voices, particularly from underrepresented groups and conditions that are stigmatized like schizophrenia. I think the FNIH is doing a great job from the top down with its leadership of fostering a culture where I felt heard, I felt respected, I felt dignified, and we all know that helps our healing processes. Now we just need to continue that culture and communicate it to communities.
Thank you. Well, food for thought, and certainly opportunities for us to take all of this input back and bring it into our work in any way that we can think of. But I would just invite everyone in this room, when you see a place where we could improve our listening or our engagement or build and re-earn in some cases trust, my email box is always open, and I think I can say the same thing for anyone else at FNIH. We want to be an exemplar in this space, and we need everyone's help and advice in making sure that we can do that successfully. And I know you have a question, so I want to not end this session until you've had a chance to pose your question.
Yeah, Johan Björkegren from Mount Sinai. So really, I was thinking, hearing about these testimonies, and thank you for sharing. So we are born with a biological capital, and we try to translate that into knowledge or social capital and maybe some financial. So with a tremendous biological value, one thing for sure is that throughout life, the biological value deteriorates. And some people are, as we heard here, unlucky, mostly of genetic predisposition to get early disease. But in fact, that actually increases, that's individual biological value. So I've been thinking about working with biobanks more in a kind of strict definition that similar to monetary banks, which is empowering us to control our monetary. We can take out the money from the bank if we don't like the bank. Are there any thoughts, and maybe Joan is the one to answer about this, how to create biobanks where we actually, using the digital capacities we have, each individual have their own data within these accounts, and they are kind of free to operate, to use them for research and share them. I told this idea to someone, and they said maybe Amazon is trying to do this already, but I think that would not be a good idea. I think it needs collaboration between government and companies, like, for instance, A&P programs. But is that something that could be envisioned for the future?
Thank you. I might pass this one down to Will and Joni and see what your thoughts are.
Yes, please.
Well, thank you for that question. I hadn't heard the Amazon relationship here yet, but that's interesting. There are certainly a few biobanks around the world, and UK Biobank is probably one of the ones where some of this work is being done. There's also the All of Us research program that has a biobank as well. And I think there are some also across the NIH too. I'll say that I think that there is value for biobanks, and it really comes down to the purpose of what you're collecting and how that need is going to help address research questions. And a lot of times collecting samples, for example, like blood samples or urine samples are quite straightforward, but when you get to other kinds of sample collections, it could be a little bit more challenging, like you were talking about. So I think it will depend on the kinds of samples that will be used. I'll say one of the things that could be of equal or maybe even greater value is to think about how we can use data from sample biobanks that have existed, and also data collection and data mining from other research activities that have been conducted, and use the data from research on existing samples or research that have already been conducted and build upon that in ways in a collaborative fashion. So that may be another approach. And then the last thing I'll mention is one of the things that we're thinking about, especially in the space of rare diseases, when, for example, there may not be many animal models for the different kinds of rare diseases out there. Thinking about using induced pluripotent stem cells, for example, you can take blood from an individual and reverse and create induced pluripotent stem cells of a particular cell type of question, and then create models related to that. And so you have a human physiologically relevant model that is based essentially from like a precision medicine standpoint from a patient who may have a particular disease. I think these are the technologies that are being considered really now to really empower this idea of how we can leverage a variety of different resources for studying a variety of different diseases.
I think you gave terrific examples there. The other aspect, and I'll just keep it a little bit parochial, is that as we embark on something as bespoke as collecting, say, endomyocardial tissue, or if it's brain biopsies, or you name it, in very inaccessible and certainly unscalable types of biorepositories, that the molecular profiling, these are early days, will create the signatures that we can map onto these other large resources. That's the ambition, and only time will tell if it'll play out, but I have confidence that that's the path that we're going.
So maybe that's a discussion for next time, but I was also thinking about how we consenting patient and the propriety or the ownership of their data, and actually making biobanks where the patients are empowered by kind of having control of their own data.
Oh, that's a wonderful thought. Yeah.
I think we are about 6 minutes over time, Mary. All right. Okay, if it's a quick one.
I know one of the challenges for all of us is translating research outcomes. And so Maggie talked a little bit about, all of our heads are spinning, I think, hearing all of the great outcomes. But just food for thought, I think, how can we partner in terms of FNIH and your member organizations in translating some of the research for our patient communities?
Absolutely, and that's something we are working on with the Patient Advisory Committee, where we can not just partner with our advocacy groups to understand the needs of patients, but also there's so much interesting material and discoveries and so many reasons to hope that maybe you can help translate that into the communities as well, and we're really looking forward to working on that. I'm fully aware that we are 7 minutes over. We need to wrap for lunch. Courtney has a note for me. I will just say, please, for 1 second, if you could put up one more QR code, and I'm a scientist by training. I cannot do anything I can't measure. So please let us know how we are doing, right? This is a very complex area. We do not want patient engagement to be a checkbox exercise. And so for FNIH, for AMP programs, it's really critical that we are doing meaningful engagement. And so we brought you different perspectives today to think about it. And we'll give you the results when you guys come back. But that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you to our panel. Thank you very much.